everyone. In this class, we'll try to learn about the posterior pituitary gland and hormones produced by these glands. The learning objectives of today's class will be: name the hormones secreted from posterior pituitary, list the stimuli that increase and decrease ADH secretion from posterior pituitary, describe mechanism of action of physiological effects of ADH, understand the physiological basis of difference between diabetes insipidus and diabetes mellitus, name the types of diabetes insipidus and how they are caused, define SIADH and give the cause of this syndrome, describe physiological effects of oxytocin, draw schematic diagram of milk ejection reflex, outline the meaning and importance of neurohormonal reflex and give examples of it, appreciate the use of oxytocin in paturation. Posterior pituitary hormone secretes two important hormones, that is antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. These hormones are formed in supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of hypothalamus and released into posterior pituitary. They are called as neurohormones as they are synthesized and secreted by neurons into the circulation. Antidiuretic hormone. The ADH is also known as arginine vasopressin, that is AVP or vasopressin, is an oligopeptide containing 9 amino acids. It is synthesized in the magnocellular cells of supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of hypothalamus. The synthesis of ADH largely occurs in the supraoptic nucleus. They are called as neurohormones as they are synthesized in hypothalamic neurons and then transported to the posterior pituitary for storage and secretion. The hormone is synthesized in the cell bodies of the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of hypothalamus. It is synthesized as a pre-hormone which becomes prohormone and then forms hormone. The genes that cause ADH synthesis are located on chromosome 20. They code for synthesis of a larger molecule that includes distinct larger protein called as neurophysin. There are two neurophycins, neurophysin 1 meant for oxytocin and neurophysin 2 meant for ADH. The neurophycins are almost identical. The precursor molecule for ADH is pre-propresophycin having 19 amino acids that contain ADH, neurophysin 2 and a glycoprotein. Pre-propresophycin is cleaved enzymatically to release ADH, neurophysin 2 and glycoprotein molecules. So this is the diagram showing the posterior pituitary where the ADH is synthesized in the paraventricular nucleus and suprachiasmatic nucleus and it is released into the posterior pituitary. Okay. So this is a production of neurohyphysin 2 where it is produced from pre-propresophycin that is containing 19 amino acids. Okay, so then it gets converted into hormone ADH. Regulation of secretion. So it all depends on plasma osmolality. Increased plasma osmolality about 285 milliosmol per kg increases the ADH secretion proportionate to the osmolality rise. The increased osmolality is sensed by hypothalamic osmoreceptors that increase the synthesis of ADH in supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei and increase ADH release from posterior pituitary. The ADH causes water retention and brings osmolality back to normal. Osmolality of plasma is very sensitive regulator of ADH secretion. Even change in 1% osmolality leads to appropriate increase in the plasma ADH level. The hypothalamic osmoreceptors are located in the anterior hypothalamus. Decrease in blood pressure and blood volume stimulates ADH secretion. Percentage fall in mean arterial pressure causes linear increase in ADH release. Decreased ECF volume also stimulates ADH secretion. However, change in osmolality is stronger stimulus than the change in the volume of plasma. That one has to remember. Hypovolemia sensitizes ADH response to hyperosmolality. Effect of hypovolemia on blood volume and blood pressure is partly mediated by activation of renin-angiotensin system. This is the relation between plasma osmolarity and the ADH. Okay, you can see there is a linear relationship between uh, the plasma osmolarity and the secretion of the ADH. This diagram shows there is a linear relation between the fall of blood pressure and to the ADH. As blood pressure falls, there is a gradual rise in the plasma levels. And this diagram shows that there is a linear relationship between the plasma osmolality and the plasma ADH with the normal blood pressure or normal blood volume or with hypovolemia. You can see that with hypovolemia the response to osmolality increases more compared to with the normal blood volume. Factors affecting ADH secretion are the factors which increase the ADH secretion are increased plasma osmolarity, decreased ECF volume, decreased blood pressure, angiotensin 2, pain, nausea vomiting, emotion, hypoglycemia, standing posture, increase in the temperature, the stress that increase ADH secretion. And the stimuli which inhibit ADH secretion are decreased plasma osmolarity, increased ECF volume, decreased temperature, ethanol, cortisol, atrial natriuretic peptide, thyroxine, and alpha adrenergic agonists. So ADH acts on the kidney to conserve water and on blood vessels to regulate blood pressure. So there are receptors for ADH on these organs. So this is how the ADH is going to regulate the blood pressure or the blood volume or the extracellular fluid volume. So binding of ADH with receptor on CD and DCT, it causes activation of adenylase cyclase system where it increases cyclic AMP levels that activates protein kinases and that helps in the transport of endosomes by macrosomes that causes the luminal surface of uh, the epithelial cells. So aquaporin comes to the luminal surface and there will be increased water reabsorption via these aquaporins. ADH mainly acts on DCT and collecting duct of the renal tubule to increase water reabsorption. Acting on the blood vessels, ADH causes vasoconstriction. ADH facilitates the memory by acting as a neurotransmitter in memory areas of the brain. It causes contraction of the smooth muscles of the spermatic cord. ADH increases the corticotropin releasing hormone and therefore increases the ACTH secretion. ADH acts on the area postrema to decrease cardiac output. It causes glycogenolysis in the liver. ADH acts as a neurotransmitter in some areas of the brain and the spinal cord. So this is how restoration of the fluid volume occurs because of the ADH when the body fluid is depleted. Okay, so diarrhea vomiting causes loss of water, so it increases the plasma osmolarity that stimulates the osmoreceptors of thalamus that produces ADH secretion, or it can decrease the ECF volume. So the reduced blood pressure decreases the vagal activity, so that leads to ADH secretion, or decreased blood pressure uh, will lead to stimulation of the nucleus tractus solitarius of in the medulla, and that causes increase in the ADH secretion from hypothalamus that in turn causes water reabsorption and restoration of the ECF volume. Diabetes insipidus. Deficiency of ADH causes diabetes insipidus, a syndrome characterized by production of abnormally large volume of dilute urine. Usually it occurs due to the hypothalamic disorder of posterior pituitary dysfunction. The main clinical features are polyuria and polydipsia. Polyuria occurs because of the ADH deficiency that promotes water diuresis. Polydipsia occurs secondary to dehydration caused by polyuria. In diabetes insipidus, urine is dilute, pure water loss, and urine osmolarity is less than 300 milliosmoles per liter. Whereas in diabetes mellitus, the urine is hyperosmolar due to the loss of glucose in the urine. That is more than 1200 milliosmoles per liter. In diabetes insipidus, urine is tasteless. Insipidus means tasteless. Whereas diabetes mellitus, urine is tasty due to the presence of more glucose in it. So there are two types of diabetes insipidus: nephrogenic, that is kidney fails to respond to ADH, and neurogenic, where there is actually deficiency of ADH secretion. Neurogenic diabetes insipidus is also called as central diabetes insipidus. Coming to oxytocin, oxytocin is an oligopeptide containing 9 amino acids. The hormone is synthesized in magnocellular neurons of hypothalamus. Oxytocin is mainly synthesized in the paraventricular nucleus, paraventricular cells of the hypothalamus through synthesis uh, that also occurs in supraoptic nucleus. After synthesis, oxytocin is secreted into the posterior pituitary where it is stored. The precursor molecules is preprooxyphysin that contains oxytocin, there is neurophysin 1 and a glycoprotein. Oxytocin secretion occurs in response to two important physiological stimuli, that is suckling at the time of breastfeeding, cervical dilatation at the time of parturition, genital stimulation in females during coitus increases the oxytocin release, stressful stimuli facilitates the oxytocin release, and oxytocin secretion is inhibited by alcohol. Functions of oxytocin. So it is responsible for milk ejection reflex. So this is a discharge or expulsion of milk from the breast of the mother into the mouth of the baby when baby suckles during breastfeeding, which is called as milk ejection reflex. The receptors here are the tactile receptors in and around the nipple. The reflex arc where afferent neural impulses are transmitted from the nipple to the spinal cord and from there via spinothalamic tract to the brainstem. In the midbrain, the information reaches the paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus via collaterals arising from the ascending sensory pathway. These fibers stimulate oxytocin secreting magnocellular neurons of hypothalamus. Via hypothalamic pituitary axis, oxytocin is released from posterior pituitary, enters circulation. Oxytocin causes contraction of the myoepithelial cells of the milk-laden alveoli of the mammary gland. Therefore, milk is forced from the alveoli into the ducts and from there to the mouth of the infant. So this diagram showing the milk ejection reflex, note that the afferent limb is ascending spinothalamic tract that gives collaterals to suprachiasmatic, supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus. The efferent limb is mainly the humeral, in which oxytocin from the posterior pituitary releases into the circulation, and that causes contraction of the myoepithelial cells, and which helps in ejection of the milk into the milk duct and ultimately into the mouth of the baby. Another important function is paturation reflex. Oxytocin causes contraction of the uterine muscle. Towards term, oxytocin secretion gradually increases and reaches a peak just before paturation. Also, the number of oxytocin receptors increases in the uterine muscle. Due to the increased plasma levels of oxytocin and increased sensitivity of uterus to oxytocin, the uterus contracts vigorously, leading to expulsion of the fetus. Thus, oxytocin initiates the and completes the parturition. Parturition reflex is also a neurohormonal reflex or neurohumoral reflex. Oxytocin receptors are also present in the ovary. It is believed that oxytocin facilitates degeneration of corpus luteum at the end of menstrual cycle. Oxytocin secretion increases in male during orgasm, uh, though the exact physiological significance is not known. In females, following ejaculation of sperm into female genital tract, oxytocin causes contraction of the non-pregnant uterus to facilitate the sperm transport into the fallopian tubes. The oxytocics, that is, preparation of the oxytocin, are used routinely for induction of the labor if labor pains does not start effectively at term. Oxytocic infusion is given to facilitate the progress of the labor. It is routinely injected immediately following delivery of the placenta to prevent excessive postpartum hemorrhage, in which uterus contracts severely in response to oxytocin and bleeding vessels are compressed in the contracted uterus that prevents bleeding. This is all about the hormones of posterior pituitary. Thank you.